kind of give you a little bit of background about us. We started by selling at farmers market and then branched off into weddings and special events. And now, as we're thinking about really retiring, we're selling through a wholesaler. So we sell to a local florist and then through a wholesaler. So that's kind of been the progression of our flower farming lives. There's a picture of our farm. That's the our house along with the greenhouse off to the side. We were having a master gardener event that day, and so that's all the master gardeners in Christian County visiting our farm. Just wanted to give you a few farm pictures. This is our peony bed. There's some other things in this picture beside peonies, but now it's pretty much all peonies. We have about 300 peony plants that we harvest from. And then these are some of our annual beds. We're not doing annuals anymore, so we stopped annuals this year. Although there are a few things that we grow for our wholesaler, like Lizzie's, but we are not doing zinnias anymore, much to my husband's relief. He hates zinnias. And you'll find out why in a few minutes. And there's our high tunnel with some of the annuals and perennials that we have out in the field. This is Dave. This was a long time ago at farmers market. One of the things we discovered is we're really bad at taking pictures at farmers market. So we don't have a lot of good farmers market pictures, but there's Dave selling some flowers at farmers market. And weddings, I wanted to show you a couple of pictures of some of the weddings that we've done, just so you see the varieties of flowers that we grow, and we, grew all season. Yeah, so some wedding special events. So a couple of things I wanted to share is that when you're a new flower farmer, you do things differently, and as you grow and you learn, you change things. So originally, we started out making our bouquets in our kitchen. So this is our kitchen. This is post bouquet making. This is also before we had a refrigerator. So we would cut all our flowers on Friday. Dave would start out cutting them in the morning, sometimes Thursday night, but mostly Friday morning. And then we'd make bouquets Friday during the day and then sell on Saturday. So this is sort of the mess after making bouquets. You can see all the empty buckets over there on the left and some semi-empty buckets. And then as we grew more, and if the weather was nice, we could do it on our back porch, which was nice. Then eventually, as we grew, we turned our basement into a design studio, and this is where we set up our buckets. So we could basically walk around this series of, it was about 15 buckets, because there's another shelf on the back side. So we could just kind of walk around in a circle and pick from the different buckets. And then buckets. So I did want to talk about buckets. So I'd say the most important thing for me to impart to everybody about post-harvest handling is cleanliness, is the cleanliness of what you're cutting into and what you're storing in and what you're cutting with. So this was just a picture to remind me to say washing buckets is a huge way of life. And if you can find a 12-year-old that you can pay to do it, it's well worth it. So find somebody to wash buckets for you, because you will get tired of it. It's really important to keep those buckets clean and to let them dry in between using them. That's what will make sure that you cut down on possible nasty things growing that will interfere with the uptake of water with your flowers, and make sure that your clippers are clean, etc. And when you cut, so this is me out in the zinnia field, and Dave would cut them and bring a big arm load over to me, and then I'd sit on this stump and strip the leaves off. And we stripped all the way up to the top. I don't know how you guys strip, but for selling to florists, they expect those stems to be clean. And so we stripped all the way up to the top pretty much. And we put them in clean buckets right in the field. And at some point, I want to talk to you about Zinnia Meltdown. At some point, we were using CVBN tablets, which I'll talk about more in a minute, in those buckets. And then we would even take them back to the house and put them in fresh water with more CVBN tablets in an attempt to try to deal with that issue. But zinnias are what we call dirty flowers. So they really need to be handled especially carefully to keep bacteria from growing. So making sure that the flowers are stripped, the greenery is stripped off below the water line. Because if you have greenery below that water line, you're just encouraging bacteria to grow. So they must be stripped clean. I wanted to show you hellebores. I don't know if any of you guys are growing hellebores, but that's one I get a lot of questions about when to cut it. I know this isn't post-harvest handling, but the problem is that they wilt if you don't cut them at the right time. So if you can see in this picture, you've got, I wish I had a little pointer where I could point to something on the picture, but you can see right in the center of the picture, there's a hellebore with a big fat seed pod. And that is the safest time to cut it. Now, it can have a flower on the same stem that doesn't have a seed pod, but it needs to have at least one flower on that stem that has started to form these big old honking seed pods. And that means it's reached an age where it's less likely to wilt. Now, some people say, okay, you can, if it starts to wilt, you can put it in hot water or you can cut it a certain way. And I've tried those myself and I don't typically find that they work really well. Hot water works great for basil, but I have not found that it works real well with hellebores, but you can always try it. So I just wanted to these are hellebores when they're in their prime, when they're the prettiest, but they're really not ready to cut yet because you can still see all their anthers and everything, and they're just not to the seed pod development stage yet. So I don't recommend them cutting them at that point. And when I showed you those pictures earlier of cutting in our kitchen, we didn't have a refrigerator then. We didn't have a walk-in fridge. So that's when we were cutting, and then the next day selling it at farmer's market. Well, at some point in a flower farmer's life, they have to decide you got to spend money to make money. And we got to that point and took a big risk. It took a lot of discussion and a lot of agonizing to spend that much money. But it was a game changer for us. And for those of you who have made that decision, you would probably agree with me. There are game changers along the way. And I did want to mention that joining ASCFG, even though it was only $250 as opposed to, $7,000 or whatever buying a fridge, early on in our career, that was a lot of money for us. And so that was an agonizing decision, but joining ASCFG was a game changer too. So I highly recommend joining the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. And so that's our fridge. It was a 6x8. I wish it had been bigger. We should have bought a bigger one. But it was a game changer because it allows us to store things. Peonies we can store for weeks at a time, where we were having to cut everything, a few days before and then have the event. So there's the inside crammed with a lot of varieties of things. One thing I wanted to point out, when we put things in the fridge, go to the next picture because I want to show. So look up at the top of the fridge and you see there's a gray metal box across the top and it has arrows, and there's an arrow to the right and an arrow to the left. That shows you where the airflow is coming from. So cold air is coming out of there. Depending on how your fridge works, if you have one, that's going to help you decide where to put your flowers in the fridge and when to put them there. So for example, typically heat rises, right? So the warmer part of the fridge is going to be up higher. But in this case, because our air comes out of the top, it's colder at the top. And so when we first bring flowers in from the field, we put them on the floor. Because we don't want them hit with that cold, icy blast of air. We want them to sort of acclimate to the cold and cool up more slowly than, like, sometimes they can show some cold damage if they get too cold too fast. So we put them down low, but some of you all might have different airflow. So just pay attention to your airflow. And also a lot of fridges, you can set the temperature. Obviously, you should be able to set the temperature that you want, but ours also has a controller so that it's a plus or minus. So you can set it to reach 35, but also you can set it to plus or minus 5 degrees. Ours never gets to has never gotten to freezing, I don't think. So we don't worry. Yeah, we don't worry too much about that. But and the other thing to think about is peonies. If you're concerned about storing peonies, they like it colder than most other flowers do. So really, as close as you can get it to 34-ish will help your peonies last a lot longer. So it helps to know what flowers like it colder and what likes it warmer. One thing I wanted to say before I talk about woodies is the other thing we do when we first bring flowers in from the field is usually we're pretty good about having a pretty full bucket. But when we put it in the fridge, Dave will kind of lift up all the stems and then kind of drop them back in just to make sure all the stems are hitting the water. But also it kind of allows the tops of the flowers to fluff out because you don't want to trap warm, moist air down at the bottom of your bucket. You really want the air to be able to circulate in there and get cold because you don't, again, want to encourage bacteria to grow. So we got this kind of lift and drop method that seems to help it get cool in there. And then I wanted to point out that woodies take a different kind of after cutting care than generally annuals and perennials do, in that their stems are, thick and hard. And so it's harder to get water up into the stems, especially when they have big, heavy heads like hydrangeas do. And hydrangeas are sort of, as most of you probably already know, are typically uh, pickier, and especially something like an Annabelle. So with hydrangeas especially, we like to use deep water. So we put, a good, what is that? A foot maybe of water in the bucket. And we also use about a fourth of a teaspoon of vinegar per gallon of water, and that lowers the pH of the water, which makes it easier to take up. Now, some of you guys might be using solutions that you buy from lots of vendors have that stuff. We're cheapskates, and David's a scientist, so he just kind of Googled, and figured out, well, what chemicals do I need? We even have our own formula that we used when we would take flowers to farmers markets that had sugar and vinegar and bleach in it to take care of the main three issues that all those solutions, you pay good money for. So we just made our own. Which seemed to work pretty well. But clean water is the most important thing when customers ask, as they do all the time, how do I make my flowers last longest? We always say just change the water every day. And we don't do that in the cooler, but if we are going to keep things for a long time, especially something like Lysianthus or hellebores, which hold for a pretty good long time, we will change the water at least once a week. Not that we keep Lizzie's for 3 or 4 weeks, but we have been known to keep them for 3 weeks for a special event. So, experimentation is really good. Just try stuff. If you wonder if something's going to work, just try it. It's not going to hurt anything. So I did want to talk about woodies that they need deeper water generally. There's hardly a woody that doesn't appreciate a little bit of a deeper water. So lilacs and quince, flowering quince. We grow a lot of mock orange. That's a real popular one. And they all benefit from deeper water and just that tiny little drop of vinegar. Um, did I talk about, back on the hydrangeas, I think I forgot to mention the quick dip. So with hydrangeas, we found that using a little quick dip, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a product you can buy. You can get it from Amazon. And you really quick dip it. So you take the ends give them a fresh cut, zip them into the quick dip for like 3 seconds or something, and then put them in the buckets of deep water. And that will really help the hydrangeas and things like the Chinese viburnum, snowball viburnum, and those kinds of things seem to need all the help they can get. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to say about woodies in particular. Um, some things do store for a long time. Tulips, this is just a picture of how we stored our tulips. So I don't know if some of you may know this, but tulips are, what do you call that? Hydro, whatever. They go towards light. And so they twist and turn and get all crazy. So in order to keep them as straight as possible, we wrap them in freezer paper. I think that's just freezer paper to keep them straight. And we stored ours in water, but we could hold them for several weeks that way, which is super helpful in the spring. When you're just getting started and you're trying to remind people, oh, farmers market is coming, and they don't always bloom exactly when you want them. So it's super helpful to be able to keep the tulips going. This is how we used to store peonies. So we take 10, wrap them up in newspaper, and you can see that we put the date on it and the variety and how many were in the package, usually 10, unless we just didn't happen to have 10. And then we would put them in the next, then we'd put them in these bulb crates. So that sort of worked, but it really was not working because all the new stuff went on top of the old stuff. And that is not good. If you're wanting to hold things for some weeks, you want to get rid of the older stuff first and keep the newer stuff until towards the end. So we came up with this new method of storage. So this is what we did this year. This is our newest way of storing peonies. And we invested some money in this crazy skinny shelf and these yellow bins that we can store. I think we can get maybe in the 50 range, 40, about 40. Yeah, depending on the size. Some of the peonies have little bitty heads, and some have gigando heads. So it depends on the size of the peony, but up to 40 in a bin, and we can label it with the variety and the date that it was picked. And so then that way we can more easily get to a situation where we can get first in, first out, which is really what we were trying to do. So I'm going to look at my notes real quick and make sure. Oh, I wanted to mention things that don't like hydration, or things that don't like refrigeration. I'm sorry, things that don't like to be refrigerated. You may already know this. Basil does not like to be refrigerated. Mahogany splendor is another thing that doesn't like refrigeration, but we would cut our mahogany splendor the night before we wanted it, or actually the morning before we wanted it, and then hydrate it with deep water overnight before using it. And that helped it hold up better because it has a tendency to wilt, especially if it's outside in any kind of warmth at all. Zinnias, some people say, oh, my zinnias turn brown when I put them in the refrigerator. Your fridge might be too cold for them. Usually they can take a few days of refrigeration, 2 or 3. Anyway, if it's not too cold, if the fridge isn't too cold. So it's worth trying. Celosia does not like refrigeration. If you guys think of anything else, if you know something else that doesn't like refrigeration, put it in the chat. Those were the things that immediately came to my mind. So cleanliness, stripping the foliage, and let's see, we talked about dirty flowers. I do want to mention, I have mentioned that zinnias are dirty. Also, black-eyed Susans are what we consider dirty flowers. So Kreisel makes a product called CVBN tablets. And when we were having problems with zinnia meltdown, has anybody ever had that? If you have, write it in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. It's a horrible, horrible disease. It made us just decide we were going to stop growing zinnias anyway. It just cropped up we'd been growing zinnias successfully for several years, and then all of a sudden we had an especially hot, um, 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 humid summer, and the zinnias looked fine in the field, and we could cut them and take them in the house and put them in bouquets and send them home with customers. And within 72 hours, the stems turned to mush. Literally, they disintegrated. It was disgusting and horrible and heartbreaking. And I think nobody still really knows what causes zinnia meltdown or how to prevent it. But we did find that the CVBN tablets help to some degree if it wasn't like a full blown, oh my gosh, everybody's got the zinnia meltdown. We just need to burn the place to the ground. But it did seem to help. And uh, zinnias are just nasty. So CVBNs. Oh, some things that like to be stored in the fridge or that you can keep for a long time. It's a surprising number of things that actually you can hold longer than a week. It's just that often then if you keep them for a long time, they don't hold up for a super long time, so they're good for event flowers. And I would say, uh, what's the blue flower, Dave? Delphinium. Delphinium is one of those where it can hold in the fridge for a pretty long time, but then it'll start dropping petals. So really it's just good for an event flower. If you keep it for 2 or 3 weeks, then really you should count on it being an event flower rather than sticking it in a bouquet. But you just experiment with that. So our last slide, I think, has our email address, so you're welcome to email us anytime. We have a website. Since we're not doing weddings anymore, the website's getting a little dated now. It has some stuff about Dave's gooseberry um, endeavors on it, but we do still have a presence with our phone numbers and stuff like that. So happy to answer any questions that you might have in the future.